What's up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG, and as always, it's my open world adventure to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. One part GTA, one part Tombstone, and just a little bit of Clint Eastwood before he went batshit insane. Here we have Red Dead 2, which lets you play as Arthur Morgan, basically the most lethal horse whisperer ever, and it tells a tale of Dutch's gang prior to the original title's beginning. It's open world, it's Rockstar, and like it or hate it, it's an event rarely equaled in sheer excitement in gaming. Let's see how cool it is to live the life of a bunch of dudes 30 days past a shower and armed to the hilt with guns where the caliber just says dead. Sorry this review is a bit late, but while I got the code early, it still was later than I expected. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Red Dead Redemption 2. Questionable leadership, never trust someone named Arthur, and the reason why cowboys should never sing. Graphics are up first. Now, without a doubt, this is one of the best looking games to ever grace a console period, and many times by a large margin, from the incredibly stable image quality of those long distance draw shots, and where the entire mountain ranges are perfectly represented as the sun sets behind some rocky outcropping and actually throws shadows all the way across the valley, to massive and majestic peaks covered in glittering snow. The game absolutely looks stunning at times, and much of that is due to the incredibly well done lighting engine. And yes, of course, what would a review be if it didn't mention the snow deformation that occurs, which single-handedly probably caused a million gamers to go look that word up so they could say it in a podcast somewhere. It's not just what's going on in the foreground and the background, but it's one of the few games where the mid-ground of the game doesn't look like a friggin' disaster with constant pop-in characters turning on and various other open-world awfulness. And while that does occur at times, Red Dead 2 has a very tight rein on its occurrence, meaning that for the most part, when you walk into a dusty sideways town with a bunch of questionably birthed folks standing on the various different storefronts giving you the evil eye, rarely do they magically just pop in, and instead they have an organic set of movements that portrays a more realistic world as people come in and out of your vision cone. I've always said that well-done lighting can elevate the look of almost any game, and that absolutely works here. It's incredibly well done with a subtleness that allows for impressive sunsets, dawn, dreary days, and blasted-out sun-drenched moments, all offering varied environmental impacts, but also not giving you that feeling that you live on an alien planet where the changes are just too dramatic for effect. Also, the animation is brilliant, from Arthur's leaning walk when he's tired that looks like he's 3 sheets to the wind and listening heavily to port, to the way that the game's physics engine sends enemies careening into the sky when you shoot them off the back of a currently bucking horse. First time you see Arthur trudging through thigh-deep snow and powering through it, that interplay of physics mimicking muscle-moving mass is incredibly well done. Or when you trot and slide down a hill, it's impossible to not notice and to not be a bit impressed. Now, that doesn't mean everything is perfect in the land of unwashed horse testicles, because it is not. First, on the PS4, the game's HDR is completely borked, washing out the image and mapping highlights incorrectly at the very best. This doesn't stop the game's lighting from looking incredible, but it's something to be mentioned if you're on that platform. While the Xbox seems to suffer a bit less, I can't say it's a good implementation anywhere on any of the platforms really, and it's a huge missed opportunity here. Additionally, the PS4 Pro version has an issue with its checkerboard rendering to get to 4K, and that can result in an overly blurry image that's easy to notice, and while you can mess with the super sampling on the Pro, overall, it's not exactly a high point. Lastly, the game really suffers from Mafia 3 syndrome, with the weather patterns changing in seconds and many times with absolutely no fade, just popping into and out of existence. It's noticeable, but it won't completely break your immersion. Now, when it comes to performance, the Xbox is less than 900p. The PS4 is 1080p, the PS4 Pro has checkerboard rendering to 4K, and the Xbox X is native at 4K, which I have to admit really does make a pretty sizable difference in image quality when you see them side by side, or if you have them to compare. All versions drop some frames down from their expected 30 FPS, with first-person mode being a major culprit at times as well. All that being said, what we have here is a testament to understanding the current technology available to a developer, and then not only doing everything you can, but a couple things maybe you shouldn't. Red Dead may have its occasional fits, but those are indeed actually occasional, and the rest of the time you're playing one of the most profoundly pretty games to ever have been made. From the texture quality on Arthur's dirty-ass face, which I refuse to wash for like 12 days because it looks so cool, to the subtle flex of tension in a horse's legs as it powers up a valley's corner. Or little elements like this. Yes, that's light shining through the skin of someone's nose. Incredible work. Sound, music, and voice.
My arm around her waist. Mark well what I do say. Tiny side upon her leg she wore. No hesitation, just kill him.
like this place and wants to stay.
And you know what? Let's do music first. Unexpected, but actually excellent. First, I have to say Woody Jackson returns from the first Red Dead in his work on Grand Theft Auto 5 and does a spectacular job in two very important areas. One, make the game's soundtrack both sonically interesting, but also in some way connect it to the prequel while still feeling different. One of the best parts of the game's soundtrack is actually the beginning, with very moody compositions and tracks that don't sound like the typical Western game that you would expect, and that flows into more traditional fare a little bit later. Second point is to make sure that while the music fits and is poignant, it also allows for the game's environments to work in conjunction and not conflict with the presentation of atmosphere and visuals. And again, this is done very well with a judicious use of control when it comes to exploration music that allows for this audio canopy to spread out far enough that you can discern both the music and the sound effects, with neither one really being that overpowering. It's an excellent soundtrack, and it's one that listening outside of the game is going to be highly recommended. And let's do sound next. Now, this is very good, but it's got a couple caveats. First, be aware of the mixing levels. It can be a bit difficult to dial in where you want the audio mix to offer an excellent environmental experience when trotting across a somewhat empty plain in the middle of the night. To that first time you fire a gun and shit flies off your subwoofer from the bass. The guns are simply noise cannons booming out incredibly thick and throaty samples throughout. The game really does set an eye towards making the game world busy sonically but not overpowering, but it can be a bit difficult to dial in. Environmentally, too, it is easily one of the best games to come out this generation, with a slick presentation of all things like leaves falling, rain hitting both the land, but you can also hear it hit the water near lakes, or the boiling up of a storm far across and away from you coming in towards you. Red Dead is incredibly well done when it comes to its audio tapestry, at least when you're discussing the samples. Because the one issue I have with the game is sometimes the sound dynamics for conversations in particular can be a bit misleading. Even with the dialogue boost all the way down, some far-off conversations sound like two people crawled into your head and built base camp there. Or worse yet, there are times when you move past somebody and that audio cuts out. Now, this was tested on stereo, headphones, and 2 home theater systems, and it happened on all of them, regardless of the audio choices made in the game. It's a bit noticeable, it's not terrible, but it is something you should be aware of. And of course, that brings us to the most important part of this audio tapestry, which is voice. I gotta say bravo to Roger Clark, who has to offer both a varied and dynamic voiceover for the main character Arthur Morgan, especially during those role-playing decisions, so you can feel the effect of your choices on the game world, but he still needs to allow for a solid understanding of Arthur's feelings in any one moment, like particular cutscenes and how Arthur will stumble over the explanation of relationships, for example, when talking to a young child. It's very well done. And since this game is more of a nuanced title with choices for many missions having an almost RPG-like style to him, Arthur is a bit more of a blank slate than, say, John Marston was in the original. And I love Roger's subtle work here. Arthur's a gruff man who starts out towing the line of pretty much everyone there, misleading the player into thinking that they've just been relegated to a one-night show in a Broadway play called Yes, Sir. But after a bit of time, this actually changes, and Arthur's presentation also changes in time, and deftly to say the least. As for the others, uniformly excellent, from the somewhat dynamic one-liners of characters around the world to the main characters in your camp. Each has their own defined thought processes, vices, and nice moments, like their camp songs, for instance. I also got to say a special mention to the voice actor for Dutch, who's portrayed by Benjamin Byron Davis. Dutch is one of the best characters represented in games so far to me. His almost sermon-like moments of pure self-faith are mixed with someone who is on the far end of losing their shit, like a friggin' fountain hooked up to a sewer line. He is absolutely excellently handled. And writing, and it's nuanced, and the varied performances by everyone is especially interesting when you consider the game has over 500,000 lines of dialogue. Of course, all that wouldn't matter if the gameplay isn't good, and of course that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. As I said before, you play Arthur Morgan in 1899. Now, this is a prequel to Red Dead Redemption. You follow Arthur and Dutch's gang in the events prior to the original title, and in many places discover the rich and varied landscape of pieces of shit that existed prior to John Marston's adventures in that game. Because if the game is anything, it's a reflection on the fact that living back then would have absolutely sucked. Now, Red Dead 2 is, like most Rockstar games, an open-world title, this time spreading its digital horizons from murky swamps filled with a who's who assortment of in-lawed outlaws to wide-sweeping mountain peaks where both you and whatever steed was unlucky enough to be saddled up have to power through it. As an open-world title, and one created from the vast detail delivery machine that is Rockstar, I have to admit at times I was both absolutely amazed and a little bit disappointed. Let's begin. Arthur and your gang take on a series of missions to further explain the story of Dutch's gang's descent into total chaos that ran into the original title. You take jobs from various other members in the group, like rustling cattle, train robberies, stealing stuff from other stealers of stuff while trying to make sure your stuff isn't stolen, and of course adding holes to enemies post-haste. This is all done in the backdrop of a land where civilization is just cropping up, as seen by the single telegraph wires heading into post offices or the discussion of farther off technologies being discovered, and a good deal of narrative filling out that world. As you progress as Arthur, you continue to learn and understand the world around you, and make no mistake, it is varied with everything from side activities like poker, getting rip-roaring drunk, hunting, fishing, and so on. But it's the continued roadmap of unique and interesting places and faces that actually astonishes me. It's also the fact that Rockstar held the game under the requirement of being and feeling like a true prequel. That means, unlike many titles where a prequel can feel disjointed, as technologies and advancements in both display and gameplay technology make it feel a bit like a Star Wars movie, where many times you're left sitting with Mark Hamill trying to pretend you actually like it. It's all done incredibly well here, though. Poker, for example, it feels familiar, but the locations feel new and fresh, like playing at your various camps. Especially as you get further into the story. 1 second playing a game on the high bluff, the next sitting down next to a massive lake. Or the tried and true Deadeye system with the ability of Arthur to slow down time to take out as many enemies in a row as possible, mimicking the gunfighting skills of Val Kilmer in Tombstone without the soul-riddling disease and Black Widow girlfriend. And it's that familiarity mixed with the new features that elevates it as well as erodes a bit of the gameplay. The first bump in the road here really comes with the survival elements. Now, this is a bit subjective, but bear with me. It isn't the first time Rockstar has sort of attempted this. I'm sure we all remember the moment you nursed your fatty body onto a treadmill and tried to triangle tap your way into a svelte or U in San Andreas. But the implementation here is never really just right. For example, cleaning your gun. It improves some stats like damage and range by removing rust and supposedly just looking cooler, because as we all know, that makes you do more damage. Just look at John Wick. But not doing so really doesn't lower its damage enough to make you feel like you filled the barrel with harsh words and flung it out at people at the speed of sound. It does make a difference, don't get me wrong, but what is an amazing attention to detail when, say, the game began, sort of ate away at my time and enjoyment as it continued. And speaking of eating, in Red Dead 2, you eat a lot, and often. This will allow for you to have more health and stamina, but not doing so won't absolutely crush your chances of catching an escaping cattle rustler or shooting out someone's eye at 60 yards. They are there, and you can't argue that they're a bit robust, but I would have loved a bit of flexibility in setting up their impact, sort of like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, where you could go in and pick and really make things make you pay attention versus not really caring at all. Your mileage is going to vary here, as I said before. I'm sure many are going to love that middle-of-the-road design. There's no real harm in that. As with the open-world titles of this kind, you're continually offered new things to do to offset the main missions themselves. Like I said, from hunting down bounties to hunting down random animals that live in the wild, skinning them and selling them for parts. You also have to keep your camp in working order by donating both cash as well as supplies to them in the form of ammo and other items. Now, this allows for them to upgrade from fast traveling options to better sleeping arrangements to just making your space look friggin' cool. And options are everywhere. For example, if you want to play a little Western cowboy dress-up, then this game is for you as well. All manner of outfits unlock as you progress further into the game, finding characters who actually make special suits if you give them the proper skins and parts to make them. Also, each bit of clothing has a rating for if it works better in warmer or colder environments. So if you're wearing this game's version of a parka on a hot summer day, your stamina is going to decrease. And most items you wear have various color choices, and of course you can always adjust the look of Arthur, trimming his hair or changing the hairstyle, which not only changes up the appearance, but can also make bounty hunters have a harder time spotting you, since 1 second they're looking for a dude described roughly as Mountain Man and Sasquatch Had a Child, to neatly dressed military man. But at the same time, all of this wouldn't be good if the game didn't control well. And there's actually some issues here. First, I have to say, I love Arthur, but the dude controls like a barely sentient sack of wet dicks. I could strap 2 pixie sticks and an RC motor to a 55-gallon drum and have better response time. It's frequently spongy and at times feels a bit worse than GTA 5, resulting in Arthur never quite moving the way you think he should. Now, of course, they are modeling a dude wearing 25 pounds of assorted civilian killing garb, but it just never feels exactly right. Ignoring my hyperbole for a second, is this a soul-crushing negative to the game? No, it's not. Once you become accustomed to it, it just changes your playstyle, and you can mitigate a good deal of the issues, but we are seeing a bunch of people mention this, and I figured I would as well, because I certainly did notice it. I would also suggest you leap into the settings as quickly as you can in the game and mess around with the options there, including the alternative control features and the different lock-on abilities, especially because free aim works pretty well when you're on foot, but not so well when you're on horseback. Also, if you're familiar with the first game, there's a couple changes to things like fast travel that you should be aware of. Make sure that you really pay attention to how that works in the game, because it's not exactly the same. Overall, I have to say this. Despite a couple issues with the control and so forth, the game offers a spectacular experience, an amazing and immersive environment, and one of the coolest overall landscapes that you're going to ever be able to explore. Fun factor. So fun is a subjective term, but one thing that Rockstar games have always got a 5-star rating in is their minutia, their moment-to-moment detail that has you investigating leads and additional discoveries that make the worlds feel more varied and lifelike than their contemporaries. Here, the developers have chosen multiple routes to do that, and in fact, one of the many favorites I have is the voice work. 500,000 lines is approximately 400,000 more than most open-world games have. The amount of verbal information here is outstanding, with you able to hit a button to interact with people, and depending on if they've just said something or not, they can break into a little story about their life as a child, rapskillion their way through life, or tell a tall tale around a campfire where you can actually see the character's eyes locking onto yours, like they're challenging you to believe them. There is so much at times it can actually be a bit daunting, but to me, it's a refreshing change of pace from many other open world games and offers this auditory blanket that can cover the rest of the environment. Luckily, despite the control not being the best, the world captures you, it wraps you up, and it throws you on the back of a horse and says, let's go for a ride. And even with the issues I described earlier, in the end, it is one hell of an experience that the first time through is going to be quite enjoyable. Like most open world games, your time is going to vary. You can be 50 hours, or you can take 100 hours because you want to perform every challenge and discover every secret. Red Dead's unique way of offering detail means that you don't always have to be looking around the world for something amazing and special, and sometimes it's just a comment of someone around a campfire concerning the intestinal distress of one of their bunkmates. To me, that is one of the biggest and most solid bits of evidence for a game that audio matters. So as you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for a sale, rent, or never touch it again rating system. This is easily a buy, but it's not without its issues, so be warned. The shooting's solid, the graphics incredible, the level of detail amazing, the sound works phenomenal from voices to music, but it is held back a bit by that Rockstar weight when it comes to the characters. And while aiming and firing works, there are times when you're going to be in battle and you're going to be like, Arthur, what the hell are you doing? And I'm not a huge fan of the lackluster survival elements that impact the character. I would have liked an option to turn those up or turn them down. But it's a testament to how strong the game is when those issues did not really impact my fun factor, especially as I continued many hours into the game. If an open world game's resting pulse is continued exploration and new experiences, thus rewarding the gamer for engaging in the open part of it, Red Dead goes out and raises that to near cardiac levels. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Reddit or Twitter. And of course, you can become a patron on the Patreon website, which allows me to continue to give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. And as always, I buy a copy of the game and give it away to patrons, even if I'm given a code by the dev. Next review coming up, Call of Cthulhu. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.